Looks like we may be live. Just waiting for confirmation here, so I don't. There we go. Great. We are live, streaming on YouTube and here in the Zoom. Thanks everyone for joining the OpenJS Foundation Cross-Project Council meeting. Today is September 3rd, 2 p.m. Eastern Time. What is that, 1800 UTC? Thanks everyone for joining. The agenda issue in the CPC is issue 316. There's a related doc there. If you're attending, please add your name if you're in the Zoom. Do we have any announcements before we get things rolling? I know Jory's not here, so does anybody else have anything that they want to announce or discuss?
I can just say the regular reminder of, consider the coming to Node+JS Interactive as it'd be a great place to get together with, and talk to people about a number of the issues that we discuss in this venue.
Great, yeah, thank you, Michael, for bringing that up, which reminds me, there's a weekly meeting to work on the collab summits and potential code and learn as well as the community corner. So if anyone is interested in joining that conversation, let me know and I will connect you to the right folks. I'll also say that in an effort to take the code and learn up a level from being node specific to being more OpenJS Foundation and including other projects within the foundation, there's conversations going on around that. If you are a project maintainer, please get in touch with myself or Manil or Christian about taking part in the Code and Learn, which is an opportunity to try and get new contributors to the project or just getting help on some good first issues, any areas that you might want to solicit some community help. Anything else? Like there was something else I was just thinking of, but now I can't remember. Great. All right, well, if there is nothing else, we will jump into the agenda. The first item on the agenda is issue 315, which I will drop in the chat. This is something I opened up a few days ago. I'll kind of recap the description here, but basically the issue is moving user feedback survey efforts from Node.js to OpenJS Foundation. The Node.js Community Committee spun up an initiative around soliciting user feedback. It kind of branched out in a number of ways. One specific way is actually running surveys on behalf of projects, in this case the Node project, but on behalf of specific working groups or any areas of interest. There is one example that exists in the repo that was fully executed around benchmarking from the benchmarking working group. So you can go to the link in the description to see more about that. Basically, this part of the effort, the survey execution effort, is something that I have been trying to spearhead for a bit. And I think it makes sense to move it to the OpenJS Foundation and make it available to any project within the foundation. The idea is that it would essentially be self-service. You could create an issue in the user feedback repo in the OpenJS Foundation if we do move it there. Currently it exists in the Node Foundation, so you open an issue, there's an issue template for creating a survey. That gives you some guidance on what is expected of you as the person opening the issue and looking to. Somebody's a little bit loud there, so maybe just be mindful. Basically, you would be responsible as the person owning the request to gather questions and like kind of an objective and things like that, and have someone, whether it's you or someone else, be the point person on the survey. And then the foundation would get involved and perhaps preliminarily help you craft your questions to make sure you're gathering data that would be most useful. And then the foundation would help you execute the survey. They would execute the survey on your behalf and return results that are usable and consumable to you as a survey requester. So that's kind of the gist of it. I think it makes sense to, especially if we're able to make this self-serve and have the foundation support it on the execution side, that it could be beneficial to other projects. So having said all that, I'll open it up if anybody has any questions or comments or thoughts about this.
I'll add my 2 cents that, I've been involved in sort of that side of things from the beginning. And, it seems to me the right place is to move it up into the CPC level, in that, it's a direct relationship with the foundation, and that I can see, there's no reason why, if it's useful for the Node project, that it wouldn't be useful for the other projects as well. So, bringing it a little closer to the foundation and making it available to all the other projects really supports moving it up.
Yeah, and that may not be an obvious thing to some folks, some projects at the moment, but we do have a few interested surveys that are coming out of the Node project. And so I think, moving it up makes sense to me. We could keep it in a Node project while we execute these few more, but I think moving it up and having it available for people to consider in the future makes sense. And I'm also mindful of the point that has been raised a few times that we don't want to take on initiatives and spin up working groups and things like that we don't necessarily have the bandwidth to support or have a clear objective for. Like I said earlier, I think this should end up being fairly self-serve, and I will champion it to get it to that point. And then hopefully at that point it should kind of run itself. So I don't think we have any concerns there. If there are no objections, I will start to flesh out what it means to bring this to the foundation. Perhaps creating a repo would make the most sense, and have an issue template there, and kind of basically just transfer it over from the Node Foundation. Maybe even transfer the existing repo over. I'm not sure, but I'll start to do the effort to flesh out what that would look like, and perhaps update this ticket as I move forward. Cool.
I can't remember if there was a separate repo for it. I don't think so necessarily. If there was, I think we should just move it over. Otherwise, probably a new one makes sense.
Yeah, well, there was the repo for the whole user feedback initiative, which did include, in-person sessions and other. So maybe a new repo makes sense just for survey-specific stuff.
Yeah, I wouldn't move the whole thing over, but if we had a survey one specific, yes. Otherwise, it'll kind of bring a lot of noise that isn't relevant. So.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'll propose a new repo and any other corresponding. All right, great. So moving on, the next ticket is the next agenda item is pull request 209. This is doc around incubating projects must have a champion. We had a discussion about this last week. Miles, you're on the call, right? I think, was it that we were going to make some clarifications around champions and mentors and kind of expand this a little bit further? Is that accurate?
I don't think that we had actually like an explicit action item. I think that it was a little bit more about like having to discuss it more and what the role of the mentor would be versus the role of, like a champion, if they were the same thing, if they weren't the same thing. I think there was just kind of those, some of those high level concerns. I can't recall, but I feel like we said we were going to keep it back to the thread, and I don't think we've done that yet.
Okay. Yeah, for context for folks, this is around new projects coming in. The proposal was that we would, someone on the CPC would be identified as a champion, hopefully step up themselves. And then the question sort of becomes, does that person, do the work to get that project all the way through the incubating process? Or do they just sort of evaluate whether it is a fit, and then we perhaps have some mentors, such as like Jory and Brian, folks from the foundation, that actually help with the legwork of moving a project through the incubating process.
Yeah, and I think part of that also came down to like whether or not this was going to be blocking for projects. So like, would we make it a gate that like if you did not have this, that you're not kind of going into?
Yeah. Yes, good point. The thinking being, if no one was willing to step up to champion this project, then does it make sense as a project within the foundation? Okay, so do we kick this conversation back to the issue and try to further flesh this out via comments in the issue? Does anyone have any comments they want to add currently?
If we decide to go with it, I can probably be a champion.
So I guess like, so it would be on like a per case basis. So it'd be like when a project, like, so I think what I had suggested specifically in that text, and the idea would be that it would add to our current process so that during the silent period, a member of the CPC or alternatively someone from the community would have to be identified as being that project's champion. And if we could not identify that person during the silent period, that they would not move into the incubation period. I guess like a high level question that we could ask is like, is this okay to add as just like a small one-off text that we add, or does it, or is this something that we should maybe create a proposal for?
That's a good question.
I personally don't think it requires a proposal, but we do need to build some consensus around this because it's going to be, a change to our process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, proposal seems like perhaps more than what we need to do, but it's still, I think we do need to flesh this out further for sure.
If the champion can come from outside the actual CPC and be effectively a member of the community, of whatever that means, doesn't that also mean that in an extreme case, a representative of the project that is applying itself could be their own champion? And if this is the case, then I don't think we do need to actually change and have a proper proposal process. We have not added any specific impediments that did not already exist. We just renamed a specific person with respect to the process.
I guess one of the big differences here would be, and like we could figure this out, is like how comfortable we are with this being ambiguous and whether or not we want to be litigating this during the process of onboarding a project. It looks like Evan has their hand up. Sorry, I was speaking up. Evan, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I just want to say, like, if we have a proposal for this, we can probably streamline this. So this will be on a general basis. So we want to, like, say, discriminate other project because, one champion might be different than the other champion. So it's important that we have some guidelines for that, at least.
To clarify, Evan, I was talking about following our proposal process to create this process, not whether or not there should be a proposal for a champion to exist.
Okay, gotcha.
But that's worth, I think, exploring as well. Maybe what we should do is set up a time for like a 30-minute or 1-hour call for the people who care about this to kind of just hash this out so we're not hashing it out on this call. Or alternatively, maybe we put an earmark on this, Joe, and revisit it at the end of the call if we have extra time. I just don't want us to spend the whole meeting on this.
Yeah, I agree. So if we do have extra time, we'll come back to it. But I think perhaps a specific meeting would make sense. All right, great. So moving on then, the next item is pull request 305. This is a charter change. I believe there's a recent comment. Yeah, so Chris, who I don't think is able to be on the meeting, commented 3 hours ago. This PR has been open for the required 14 days. Many approvals, no objections, so he'll bring this charter change to the board for their approval. I think he even, did he say that he's already sent it via Brian? Yeah, right, is that the one? Yeah.
Yes, it's already been sent.
Fantastic.
Yep.
All right, so we will leave this open. Does it have the appropriate, yeah, it's blocked, board approval required. Okay, great. So we don't need to spin our wheels on that one at all. We'll check back on it next week. The next item is, this is issue 296, specify the scope of CPC votes during application and incubation. I pinged Toby earlier. I mean, maybe yeah, and you opened this issue as well, Toby. The last comment from a couple of weeks ago is a question from Miles, well, some clarification, and then a question about any documented process that might help alleviate some of the concerns. Do you want to chime in?
Sure,
Toby?
yes, absolutely. Miles and I talked about this offline in the meantime, and I think we came to the conclusion that what I was asking for was basically norms around how that project would be, how that would be run, basically. I think what we came down to was the conclusion that if you look at other projects, you have like similar, like there's no process around this. It's all based on norms. And the fact that other projects have a long history, and the OpenJS Foundation is new, makes that more intimidating from the outside, basically. And so I think what Miles was suggesting would make sense would be to sort of describe some of the expectations around how maintainers that were sitting on the CPC, what the expected norms would be for them with regards to various questions around the CPC role, including that one. Miles, is that a good characterization of where we ended?
I think it seems good. I think I need to like refresh my memory a little bit more on like how we make something that's actionable. If I recall, yeah, it was like having the clear like expectations for individuals. Is that right?
Yes. I mean, basically the idea for that particular that specific problem in this issue would be if a CPC member has issues with a project up front, these issues should be brought up to the CPC and to the project as they show up, and not sort of like be kept under the rug up until there's a votation on whether the project should continue or not, and then sort of be pulled out like that. So an expectation of like behaving in good faith and raising issues as soon as they show up. I think that was for that specific issue, sort of like where we landed.
Yeah, and then I think a few of the other things were also that like in how we read it, like there was never an intention of a like official vote to move out of the incubation phase, and then further, and this is a good thing to get people on the call to chime in, since we do have a handful of our CPC on here. I think that the hope was that the votes were more a matter of process. And Brian, this is something that would be good to like get a response from legal on this. Like, do we need a vote to like legally bring projects into the foundation? I have firmly on my head my I am not a lawyer hat, but I was under the impression that for certain things along those lines, especially with how we are chartered as a CPC to oversee this, that we did need like an official vote from voting members to kick off that process. But that vote should be completely non-contentious, and generally, there should be no surprises at that point. It would be more of a formality. than anything else, and that like moving into incubation would itself be a consensus process, not a voting process, as like in general, the majority of things that we do within this committee are meant to be consensus based and working towards having unanimity rather than having dissent. So, you know, I think to the point that is being raised by Toby, that a good chunk of this is definitely around like norms and making sure that those expectations are documented, because as we bring in more people and as, you know, we get further and further away from, you know, the spirit of how all of this is written, we can expect people to operate in good faith. But if people don't kind of understand the spirit or weren't aware of it, they may, you know, not even recognize that like that's the expectation that's being put on them.
Yeah, and Miles, just to chime in on this, so I can certainly ask Gessmer Updegrove for an opinion on this. I can come back to that as a to-do, but one thing I will say is that one place where we would certainly need board approval is if a project coming on board had any budget dependency. So I mean that's one thing I do know for sure, but I will check on the other one.
Right, and I think so. But I think in specific to this one, like whether we need a vote at a specific transition point where they become like, you know, and actually joining the foundation versus not, that's separate from this one, which was around like during the quiet period. So I think we could probably, unless there's objections, document that like in the quiet period, there's not any intention to have a vote. It's to get a feel for whether there are going to be objections.
Yeah, so I think, sorry to interrupt, Michael, but I think
Yep.
we've documented that in the meantime, and that's been fixed in the process document.
Okay,
I'm
so
not
that's
sure
already
if that was merged, but I think like there's a pull request that either has been merged or is ready to be merged.
Okay, because I'm just trying to document the concrete thing. So you think that's already PR for that, right?
Let me check.
Okay. And then the second part was, it sounded like, you know, in terms of concrete actions, adding some guidance to that document that says, you know, the expectation is that CPC members will bring any personal concerns that they have, you know, up early and in advance of exit from the quiet period, so that they can be discussed and shared, so that, you know, it may not block the exit from the quiet period, but there shouldn't be, you know, all of a sudden after that point, one of the CPC members saying, well, I've always thought this was like a problem from the beginning, right?
Precisely, and that should be quiet period and incubation, actually.
Now, in theory, and perhaps we need to be more explicit about this, our current membership expectations, which, you know, includes has the CPC as part of it, is when decisions are made within the established guidelines and policies of the OpenJS Foundation project or groups, those in leadership roles have a responsibility to uphold and respect the decision, even if they disagree with it. This is especially important in external communication, for example, in social media. Now, a lot of this was meant about like upholding decisions that were made. So perhaps we need to add language that makes it explicit. Like if you have objections or concerns, you're expected to bring it up, you know, early and in a timely fashion. But I do think that a chunk of what we're talking about here is kind of already covered in the membership expectations document.
Yeah, although I don't think it hurts to add a few more lines to say, you know, we have this quiet period specifically to, you know, these things to be voiced in advance, because it's, yeah, it never hurts to have more reminders than less.
When we originally made the proposal for the project progression and the onboarding, there was language that was removed because people felt that it was too harsh, that I can dig up, but it is essentially stated like, if you have major objections and you're a CPC member, you're expected to bring it up during the silent period. But people pushed back against that specifically because, well, like what if things change? What if there's information that becomes available later? So just from a prior art standpoint, you know, there was pushback against stronger language there when it was initially drafted. It doesn't mean we shouldn't try to add more. In fact, we could even dig up the exact language that we removed. But I just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, like I can certainly see like just because there weren't objections before the quiet period doesn't mean there can't be objections afterwards. It's more the, it sounded like in the discussion that adding some reminder that, it's like basically just do your best to raise everything in advance and discuss it. Even, don't, encouraging the, like, if you have concerns, it's probably better to err on the side of expressing them than not, right?
Yeah, and that's something that we could add to the membership expectations, which I think is in general good guidance for anything, including this, which is like, if you have concerns and objections, bring them up as soon as possible.
Yeah.
I think that that broad statement covers this case. Toby, if we had that really, really broad guidance as far as how we expect CPC members to engage in everything, would that be sufficient for your concerns, or do you want something that's more specific to the silent period?
No, I actually think that broader norms are better because it will solve more problems than just this one.
Okay, so I can take an action item of drafting something to the membership expectations.
Sounds good.
Thank you so much.
And maybe we should kind of earmark this conversation for if we have when we have a meeting around champions within the incubating process. If we need to discuss this further and flesh it out further, we could do it there as well in that meeting.
But it sounds like we can pretty much, if Miles opens that PR, it lands, we can close this.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I added the PR that was already merged for the no vote in quiet period.
Okay, thanks.
In the document.
So I've added in the minutes that really we had those two things that we needed to do to close this out. One's done, the other one's Miles got the action to open a PR.
Right now.
Great. And if we can just connect that PR to this issue or somehow make sure the issue, it's clear the issue that this work is being done, we should be able to close it. It's great. All right, great. So moving on. Let's see. So that brings us to issue number 295, which is another issue that Toby brought up almost 3 weeks ago. There's been a little bit of discussion on this. Commit to providing a reply to an application within a specific time frame. Miles mentions that we had originally discussed a silent period of 2 weeks, although it could theoretically move faster. Toby says that sounds great. Is this something that we should discuss further, or perhaps just document and move on?
My first thought is 2 weeks really reasonable. We need to get generally like at least time for an FYI from the board. I mean, I suspect that takes a week.
That's a good point.
If it's obvious, I think so, but otherwise, it doesn't leave a lot of time for talking or thinking or.
So if we think about kind of like how a business would approach this, you have certain kind of guidelines. We could have something that like you should expect an initial response within an amount of time, and an idea of the time frame within an amount of time, or something like, not to be too broad and hand wavy, but we could have a commitment to responding within 1 week. And if the process is to take longer than say 2 or 3 weeks, to be given a heads up about it. So at least like we could commit to communicating and not just going radio silent.
That I think is good. Like, response, an initial response that says, basically, thank you for your application. We are considering it at, within a week. I could, we could pick something like a month to say, normally you get a response within a month. And if it's going to be longer than that, we'll send you a communication or whatever the right time is, right? Like that sounds like a good approach to me.
That sounds fair to me. Again, something that we just need to document.
What are people's thoughts in terms of like, you know, the 1 week and 1 month for, you know, 1 week to say, hey, thank you for your application, 1 month for, you know, normally you hear back from us in terms of you know, entering the next phase within a month? Or is that, you know, or should it be 2 weeks or whatever? I mean, I'm picking a number, right? But what do people think in terms of that number?
I think a month sounds really quite long at that point. Yes, it's likely that the process is going to take that long, but I think the language would be far more welcome if it was 2 weeks and we would say within 2 weeks, yeah, it's going to take us a month.
I would potentially even advise that we go and don't give any sort of commitment to how long the process will take, but make a commitment to how long there will be between communications.
100% agree with that.
I definitely agree with that as well.
Agreed.
At this point, we haven't been through the process completely yet, so can't really say what's typical and what isn't.
Toby, would that be at least like a partway, like appeasing to your concern? I know that it would be great to give people a timeline, and perhaps we can even give a timeline that it will be no longer than this amount of time. But to me, I guess it would be much better for us to just say, like, we will never take, like, you will always hear from us within, you know, 48 hours or a week, rather than, you know, we'll give you an answer by this amount of time and then have to change it for everyone.
I do like personally, like, we'll get back to you within a week. You know, there won't be more than, say, a week that goes by. And that would, in my mind, would be something that the champion would be responsible for making sure happened. You know, we'll give you an update every week as to what's going on.
I mean, there's also like the variable of time itself, where someone, you know, if it's submitted literally the day after a board proposal or a board meeting, that's like super challenging, of like, it's going to be at least a month before there's like a direct approval there, versus it's submitted 2 days before.
We don't need board approval to move people into the incubation phase, or at least not in a meeting.
Got you.
You may want to give like the board an FYI via email in case they have an objection, but the board is on the exact same email. Like, every board member is on that list. This is not something like in general that, like, in my mind, needs any official sign off to move into incubation. The point of the silent period is to give, like, if the board or if individuals know of a specific reason why a project should not come in, that gives us the opportunity to kind of put the brakes on something before it becomes a public conversation.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and I think that kind of feedback may come quicker. I don't know, like in the extreme case anyway.
Yeah, and that was really what it's meant to filter out. And then further, and this is kind of to Toby's point, and this is something that we can maybe have in our membership guidelines, it's also meant to, like, kind of, maybe undermine is not the best word to use when I'm talking about a positive thing. But it's meant to stop, like, an anti-pattern of, oh, I have a problem with this project, but I'm just going to be silent until the vote and then try to undermine it at the time of the vote. Now, I don't think anyone's going to actually do that. But the purpose of the silent period was to make it so that if people have major concerns, they're brought up early, and that if big blanket concerns that aren't kind of tied to specific metrics or tied to certain measurables are brought up later in the process, we can kind of point at the process and say, hey, you know, like, this is not invalid, but like, you really should have brought this criticism early, and it may not be enough now to kind of put the brakes on something that we've publicly committed to incubating. So if someone just, like, doesn't like a project, they can't undermine the process.
So I'm concerned about the two aspects of this, right? One is that you know, once the process is started, to make sure that, you know, a good faith effort is done on all sides to take it all the way through incubation. And the other one is to make sure that the timeline for the actual silent period is well understood, so that whatever announcement have to be made afterwards can be made. And so here, I feel like what would be helpful, if I look at it from sort of my perspective, would be, I like the idea of having a commitment for an update that's in a short time frame. And I think that something like if this is a simple case, we can give you an answer in a week. Or, if this is like, if there are no, if this can go through smoothly, we can give you an answer in a week. We will need, X amount more time if there are, pending issues about bringing in that project. And I'm just saying a week, it could be 2 weeks or like 24 hours or whatever makes sense from a purely like technical perspective on your side.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have a bit of a, like, it would be great to be able to get back in like a week or something like that. But given the nature of, volunteers' time, and even just to give people a little bit of time to think about a project, because in this,
Sure.
it can be a big decision, that I'm just reluctant to make it too short. Like, that's why I'm throwing out a month, because, I figure after a month, if anybody's had concerns, they've had enough time to become aware, voice them, have some discussion. Whereas in a week, somebody could go away for a week, they come back and it's like, oh, wait a second, I had a big problem with that, right?
So first off, oh no, never mind. There isn't an attendee. It said an attendee. I think that like what we're talking about here is an SLA, basically. Like we want to have an agreement of, like we will do this within a certain amount of time. And Toby, I think what like the pushback that you're feeling here a little bit is we haven't even done this enough to know what we should commit to.
Yeah, no, I get it. I mean, like that's why I'm insisting that it has to make sense from your side. And I mean, the answer right now probably is you would love to do that, but we just don't know. Right?
Yeah, and
which I get it.
What I would feel comfortable to committing to right now, which I think is a step in that direction, is making a commitment to timing of communication and keeping things up to date.
Okay, that works for me.
And I think, oh, sorry, you were saying?
No, please.
And for me, it's like if we have that kind of like timeline of communication back and forth, at the very least, there shouldn't be concerns about like it taking too long or radio silence, which would really be, in my personal experience, like the bigger problem, would be being dragged along without any answers. And I would totally be up for revisiting this after a couple projects come through and we have an idea of like how long the time takes for people to feel comfortable.
No, I understand. That makes complete sense. And I was going to say it before when I interrupted you. I'll come and bug you back about it like in 6 months or a year or something. Thank you.
Okay, so it sounds like we should, the follow-on thing would be like, who's going to be responsible for making sure somebody gets back to them with an update every week, right?
Isn't that, like something that at the very least, like we can rely on Brian or other PGMs from the foundation to help maintain for us? To me, that seems like the perfect, either that or the champion, right? Like,
right.
This is the kind of stuff that a champion should be responsible for, is ongoing communication. And then Lou and that foundation staff should likely, in my personal opinion, be responsible for it.
That's what I was thinking.
I was wondering that. I was wondering that too, like maybe initial communication kind of confirms that we've got the application and we say within 2 weeks, we'll identify a champion that should help you through the process or something along those lines.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm happy to be the greeter. And then unless there's a situation where nobody has any particular affinity to the project, I'm certainly happy to work with them as well and make sure that they get the status updates, the heartbeats, make sure that they know that they're still in the process, still under consideration, and that things are still moving. But at the same time, I also don't want to step in if somebody does have a connection with the project or knows the maintainer particularly well. I don't want it to look like I'm displacing them. So in lieu of that, I'm certainly happy to help.
What I just took as notes, which is what I'd suggest, and we can change it if we don't agree, is like, if we can get Brian to do that until we figure out an agreement on champions and clarify that.
Yeah.
I'm going to just make a suggestion. Oh, go ahead, Miles. Sorry.
Something that's dawning on me right now too would be perhaps what we really need here is like champion expectations to go along with that thing of specifying a champion. And like we could add to it that the champion is responsible for like ongoing communication with the projects, or at the very least ensuring that someone is responsible for it.
Yep. That's very much in line with what I was going to say. Whether it's me or whether it's somebody else, I'd suggest that the person who's responsible for first contact be the same person every single time, so that nobody gets confused about who's actually supposed to be doing it. And I'm certainly happy to do that, or if we wanted to have somebody else do that, that's totally fine too. But I just think it should be very consistent from time to time so that it doesn't go accidentally neglected.
Although I was just going to say, I think the first one might come back as a thank you, we have it, and that could be, you know, Brian or Jory. And then if we had a champion, it might consistently come from them.
Yep.
Would be the only tweak on what you said. But yeah, I think once the conversation, you know, once it's ongoing, it should be one person.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, something that also is worth considering here, you know, we've had some projects already start the process, and like they opened an email to that thread, Brian, and then it ended up becoming a conversation back and forth between that team and, you know, our team in that thread.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had some, you know, like branches from the thread that are more private conversation. But perhaps we need to revisit that and consider whether or not, like, you know, we want a firewall there or not. Like, do we want an open conversation between all the CPC members and the entire team that's applying during that phase? Or do we want like a point of contact that's communicating back and forth? Because we don't really have that locked down right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was personally, you know, not upset, but a little bit surprised that the application person was on the same stream as chatting back and forth, right? Because that can have a couple of, you know, one, people might not be quite as open to raise their concerns, and two, it might actually make concerns which are like soft concerns sound more discouraging to the applicant than they really are, right?
Yeah, I was thinking that too. Maybe we should have like an auto-generated email to the you know, the list for considering this for everyone that's
Yeah, I mean, there are ways that we can do this. We set up the list originally to receive mail from anybody who's already a member of the groups. This is the same as what we've done, for example, for reporting, for code of conduct reporting. And the idea is that the person is not actually able to join the list, but they can mail into the list, and then if somebody replies all to the message, then of course it goes back to them because they're on directly on the message. I can set up an alias that would instead just forward to the list. So when somebody sends in an application, it goes to the alias forwards it onto the list. So even replies don't go back to the person. Yeah, there are certainly different ways to do this depending upon what we want to achieve.
Yeah, I think what we're just saying is we should work that through along with the champion expectations and.
Yep.
Yeah, I think the forwarding list makes sense, but you know, maybe that's something for us offline to try to, you know, figure out how to improve.
Because you really want a little bit of both. Like, you'd like people to be able to reach out to the applicant, but not necessarily have all the discussion with them involved. So.
Right. So if you could just maybe let me know what it is you'd like to achieve here, I will figure out a way to make it happen.
Yeah, and there's tools like, I think like Salesforce or Jira, and I'm not saying we should use these tools, but ones that if like we want to have an SLA can handle the like routing in of emails, managing and keeping track of like open tickets and making sure that we hit those SLAs, and can even like bug us when we're not on top of it. So, you know, from a customer service perspective, we may want to consider exploring, you know, a slightly more rigid way of managing this if we want to ensure that we're being fair to everyone.
Yeah, I agree. Having something like that would be good. Something rigid, for lack of a better term, but some sort of process that is consistent.
Okay.
Okay, just as a time check, we've only got 10 minutes.
Good boy. Okay, thank you.
It might also be handy to have like a 5-minute private section at the end too.
Okay, sounds fair. So can we move along then, and we'll flesh some of this out offline, I think. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. So the next item here is issue 289, also opened by Toby. Thanks again, Toby, for going through this process and raising some things. I believe that this was addressed in a pull request that I'm trying to get to.
Yeah, I think this will close along with 305, which we discussed earlier. We're just waiting on board approval, and that'll close out with this.
Great.
So I don't think there's anything to talk
Perfect.
about.
Perfect. And then the next thing on the list is the duplicate onboarding checklist. Miles opened a PR. That's pull request 304. And as Miles said an hour ago, he plans to land this if there are no objections in the meeting today. Are there any objections to this? We've got a couple of approvals. I actually pinged Jory before the meeting to see if she could check it before we got into the meeting, but let me just check my messages. Yeah, I have not heard back from her. So maybe we can, get her explicit approval on this, but otherwise, is there anyone else in the meeting that has any objections to this pull request? I'm dropping in the chat for use. I've approved. Michael's approved. Other folks comment if you can. Great. So moving on, the last things that we usually, actually, let me make sure. Miles also mentioned issue 317 that maybe we should just touch on real quickly in these last remaining moments. I saw that Wesley Westtodd responded about GitHub Actions versus Travis. Miles, do you want to give some context and update or anything here?
Sorry, one
issue
second.
317. Yep. Yeah, this is add Travis to the org. And then Wes responded about.
Yeah, that was really high level. It was like we added the linter, so it was let's try to make sure we're actually linting and not regressing. But I think Wes Todd suggested that perhaps we just use GitHub Actions for that. So I think we could ping someone at GitHub about getting actions turned on and then use that instead.
All right, great.
I don't think we should, if that's just as easy, great, but we shouldn't, I don't think we're at the point yet where we've chosen one over the other, right? So if we've got Travis, it's going to work.
I think the biggest difference, Michael, would be that Travis will require giving third-party approval to Travis and going through that whole process.
Sure.
Whereas actions, if they're turned on, you just kind of get access to it.
Yeah.
So,
no, I'm happy if we do that. I just saying, I don't think, we've said no Travis either, right? Just,
yep.
So if it's easier and everybody agrees, great. That enough said.
All right, excellent. So we'll investigate actions there and see if there are any objections to using that as opposed to Travis. So we have 6 minutes left. There's a request for some a private period. So maybe we should wrap up the meeting here, say our goodbyes, and have a short private session. So I'm going to stop the stream. Thanks for everyone for participating. Let me kill that.